Hello, ladies. The Big Val Boski here, Val Venis, the captain. And I'm about to walk into these doors and do myself a career interview with the Hannibal TV.
This is Hannibal from the HannibalTV.com, and we are here with WWE legend Val Venis, who was also a wrestler, of course, in Mexico and Japan and other places that we're going to get into. And right now he works mainly in the marijuana industry. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well, man. Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. And I guess you live out here in Phoenix now?
I do live here in the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona.
How do you like it compared to cold Canada?
Canada is beautiful, man. I love Canada, no question. Down here you got lower taxes and you got the sun shining all day long every day. So there's definitely some, there's like a magnet down here in Phoenix, Arizona for me. But yeah, I miss Canada. Don't miss the taxation, but I miss Canada.
Were you a wrestling fan growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. I loved wrestling growing up. Going back to the Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair days. Even when I was a kid watching Hulk Hogan defeat Iron Sheik to win that title. I was a little kid at that point in time. Yeah, so I've been a huge fan of professional wrestling all my life.
And I guess you grew up, somewhere around the Oakville, Peterborough area.
Yeah, I was born in Oakville, actually Mississauga, but we lived in Oakville when I was born. And then we moved to Markham during my teen years, and then after that moved to Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, and that's where my family is currently at, still in Peterborough.
And I heard you used to race motorcycles a little bit in your younger days.
Yeah, I raced motocross pretty much all of my younger life, right up until I was about 18, 19 years old, and then took off, left Canada, and started wrestling.
And I understand you were trained by the Missing Link.
I was trained by the Missing Link and his son, Jason Sterling.
How did you end up running into them?
So it was one of those things where, I was wrestling all through high school and whatnot, and there was I guess Jason Sterling was teaching for another a small school in Hamilton, Ontario that had started up, and I can't remember the name of the guy that started that school. I was only there for a very short period of time before Jason's dad opened a school. Or I guess Jason and his dad had opened the school, and so I started training with those two, and that's really where I got my start.
I read Jason's dad's book, and it was a pretty interesting book. He actually was into marijuana a lot. From what I understand, was he into it in those days as well? Because I know he went through periods where he was off.
So when it comes to the Missing Link being into marijuana, I heard the stories back then. He used marijuana almost religiously at many points throughout his life. At that point in time, marijuana wasn't even on my radar. I was anti as anti could possibly be. I didn't know anything about marijuana other than the lies that I was indoctrinated to believe through the education system and the media.
And he was also a guy, I don't know if you ever heard this, he liked nudist colonies. I don't know if you ever heard those stories.
Yes, the Missing Link and his nudist colonies. He did like those nudist camps, let me tell you. I heard plenty of stories about them over the years, that's for sure.
Do you have any stories about him himself that people might not know that used to be fans of him?
Not really. Dewey was very much, it's hard to explain. Dewey was kind of an enigma, I guess, in the school. We didn't really know a whole lot about him. He would come out into the backyard and teach us a few things here and there, but for the most part it was his son Jason that was doing most of the technical stuff when it came to teaching professional wrestling.
Do you think he could have had a better WWE run? Because I think he ended up quitting or something right around his peak. He didn't get along with some of the office or something like that, from what I understand, because he was getting a big push there.
Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of the story that happened with Dewey in WWF at the time. I do know he looked fantastic, and he was a tremendous showman, and he garnered attention everywhere he went. One of those guys that was always in shape, even up till the day he passed. And so could he have had a much better career? Probably, absolutely. I believe that. Dewey Robertson was definitely the type of guy that I think Vince McMahon fell in love with, character-wise. But whatever happened business-wise between the two, that's something I was never really privy to and don't know a whole lot about. But yeah, I believe if the stars aligned correctly for Dewey back in those days, I think he could have had a massive WWF career.
So I guess you probably started on the Canadian independents, and it seems like you pretty much fairly quickly went to bigger federations.
Yeah, I started in Canada and did a few spot shows here and there. One of them was with Ricky Johnson. He had done my first show was in Regent Park in Toronto, which is it was at a school in Toronto there, and that was my very first match. I had met Sexton Hardcastle at the time, who's better known as Edge these days, and so that was my first time that Edge and I had actually met. And so we started there, and what happened is Edge stayed in Canada, continued to do the independents there, and I had left Canada and started doing smaller organizations like All-Star Pro Wrestling in England for a year. Then I went to Ozark Mountain Wrestling, then it was Mexico, or Puerto Rico, then Mexico, then Japan. So I went around and did a lot of the smaller organizations while Edge did a lot of the independents in Canada and the United States.
How did you like Brian Dixon when you were wrestling for All Star Wrestling?
Brian Dixon he was always really good to me, man. I starved over there, no question, but everything was taken care of. I mean, it was all I had to do was keep my mouth shut and my ears open and learn, and that's exactly what I did. And I had a lot of fun doing it, and I would never change anything in that case. I spent a year over in England, and it was an incredible introduction to wrestling full time, that's for sure.
I guess you were doing the Butlins camps at that time.
I was doing the Butlins camps in England at that time. Yep, lost a lot of brain cells at those Butlins camps, let me tell you.
And you got booked in All Japan pretty early in your career too, and they were just coming off a huge run. How did you end up getting booked there?
I was wrestling in Puerto Rico at the time, and Shane Sewell and I were a tag team called the Canadian Glamour Boys. Shane had left Puerto Rico for a small amount of time, and Puerto Rico then tagged me up with another pro wrestler named Rex King. Rex had known Johnny Ace and had worked in All Japan Pro Wrestling several times, and so it was through Rex King that I got my first full-time wrestling job. Via Johnny Ace. So Rex kind of introduced me to Johnny Ace and got my first full-time wrestling job. We went over there as a tag team, Rex and I did. And started out that way. That's how I got in there.
Was Giant Baba still alive at that time?
Yes, Giant Baba was still alive and well at that time, and he was at most of the shows that I was at. And it was an interesting time in pro wrestling, that's for sure.
How was his wife to deal with?
I didn't really have a whole lot of dealings with his wife, but every time that we spoke, that we had any kind of interaction, she was very, very professional. I've heard stories in the past, but I never witnessed those stories myself or anything even remotely close to those.
I guess Johnny Ace would have been one of the bookers for All Japan then?
Johnny Ace was the booker for All Japan at that point in time.
He was always known as a really good finish guy. Did you have any experience of him giving you finishes?
One thing I will say about Johnny Ace is the man can come up with finishes. Really good finishes. If ever I was, at a loss and like writer's block, you kind of get wrestler's block, I guess it is. Trying to come up with some really cool idea for the fans that would, or a really cool idea for a finish that would, the fans would really enjoy. And sometimes you run into a writer's block, so to speak. And Johnny Ace was always the guy I would go to kind of break through that writer's block and get a little more creative and come up with a suitable finish.
And you mentioned being a tag team with Shane in WWC Puerto Rico. He ended up staying there for years, and I believe he married a Puerto Rican. What was your experience like in that company?
Wrestling in WWC in Puerto Rico was almost like a dream come true. Shane and I have been tagging for a little over 2 years at that point in time, off and on, of course. And when we first got our full-time wrestling job in Puerto Rico, it was basically we fly down there. We were going to be given one shot, and it was in Caguas. It was on a Saturday night, and if we did good, they would negotiate a deal with us. If we didn't do well, we were going to pay our own ride back to Canada. Needless to say, we flew down there, we did the shot, and immediately as soon as we got back in the locker room, they started negotiating with us, and we came to a deal. And, that started our deal in Puerto Rico, and it was awesome down there. I loved wrestling in Puerto Rico. Back then, it was still 5 nights a week, 5 nights a week, 52 weeks a year. There was no time off down there. So for a guy that's trying to get as much experience as fast as possible in the professional wrestling industry, at that time working 5 nights a week, every week all year long, was a tremendous opportunity, and I took full advantage of that. And I think Shane did too. And Shane went on to become a big star down in Puerto Rico.
Yes, that's for sure. I was actually down there a bit after you were down there. You were kind of had the legendary status down there as well. Did you ever have any pay issues working for Carlos?
Did I have pay issues working for Carlos? Plenty.
And you ended up debuting in CMLL with the steel gimmick. Is that a gimmick you came up with?
The steel gimmick was, I believe, created by Paco Alonso down in Mexico City. Paco Alonso was the main man at Arena Mexico, and they offered me that mask, and I took one look at that mask, and I said, that's a badass mask. Hell yeah, I'll take that job. And hence the steel character was born.
How was Mexico compared to Puerto Rico, like the environment of living there as far as crime and like the quality of life as a wrestler?
In Puerto Rico and in Mexico, I think in terms of what's different, definitely the wrestling's different. Puerto Rico's a lot more Americanized. Mexico's more like a gymnastics show, really. It's in characters as well. Mexico, to me, wrestling-wise, is completely different compared to Puerto Rico when it comes to living there and the quality of life. I love both Puerto Rico and Mexico. I always heard about massive crime rates in Mexico City, and yeah, there's definitely crime down there. We're talking about, 22 million people living in that city. It's one of the largest cities in the world, so crime's to be expected, but it's not like you walk out your door and you see crime. In fact, I was down there almost 2 years and never really saw any other crime other than watching cops pull people over and extort them for going 5 miles an hour over the speeding limit. That's the only crime I saw was state-sanctioned crime. Is there crime down there? Obviously there is. There's lots of crime down there, but the quality of life and the fact that people need to worry more in Mexico than in other cities, I don't believe that's true. I think it's all media hoopla.
And is it true you actually learned how to speak Spanish while wrestling for these companies?
I learned to speak Spanish more in Mexico than I did in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, they're Americanized, and a lot of people speak English. And when you're not forced to learn Spanish, you just learn the basics, basically. When I got to Mexico, it was more of a necessity to learn Spanish. And one thing I will say about this, when you're forced to learn a language, the learning aspect of learning that language becomes a lot easier. I don't know why, I can't explain it. When I was in Puerto Rico, I had a desire to want to learn Spanish, but maybe it's that easy, you can't figure this out, so you just speak English. And of course, a lot of Puerto Ricans speak English, so they can respond in English. In Mexico, it's for the most part of Mexico City, it's Spanish, that's it. And I I don't know what triggers inside the brain, but when you're forced to learn a language, it's really easy to learn it.
When did you first start having contact with WWE?
Started having contact with WWE through Victor Quinones and Bruce Pritchard at the time. And, we talked a few times. I was in Mexico when I finally got the call to come up and do a tryout match up in Des Moines, Iowa. And so flew up to Des Moines, Iowa, did the tryout match, and then went back to Mexico. And then I got another call shortly after that asking if I was interested in doing the Val Venis character. And you didn't have to twist my arm to take on that Val Venis character, I can tell you that much.
And just before we get into that, Victor Quinones, I knew him from IWA Puerto Rico. I know he had some connections with WWE, but at that time, what was his job with WWE?
So Victor Quinones was a businessman. He worked for himself. He was more of a scout, I guess you could say, for WWE. And him and Bruce Pritchard had some business dealings. Victor Quinones had his fingers in a lot of different organizations, CMLL, a couple different organizations in Japan as well. And then, of course, he had his connections in WWE, one of them being Bruce Pritchard as well. And so Victor Quinones was a great asset in terms of making other connections around the world. And like I said, he was a businessman. He was always straight up, and he was a guy that you could trust.
So they came to you with this Val Venis character. Was it a standard 3-year contract, or did they have longer plans for you since they already had a character in mind?
We did the standard 3-year contract for my very first contract, and then went on to 5 years after that.
Okay. So how did they approach you with this character?
I was in Mexico City. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Vince McMahon on the other side. And he was in the room with Vince Russo. And he basically said, hey, we have this character. The name is Val Venis. And he spelled the last name Venis. And he said that Val Venis is a former film star turned pro wrestler. Now, in my head, I'm thinking, former film star turned pro wrestler. That's kind of like Jesse Ventura, the Hollywood Ventura thing. It's already been done. It was kind of one of those things where I was like, I'm already going to turn this down. And then when he said Val Venis is actually an adult film star turned pro wrestler, it was like, ka-king, twist my arm, I'm taking it right there. And Vince was telling me at the time, think about this for 24 hours just to make sure you feel comfortable doing this character, because if you don't feel comfortable doing the character, it's just not going to work. Well, I didn't need 24 hours to take on that character. I felt totally comfortable doing that character, and was definitely looking forward to it the second he mentioned it to me.
And for the vignettes, there was a lot of vignettes before you made your debut. Were those all filmed in one block of time, or did they do those over several weeks?
We did all the vignettes in 2 days. I was still, under contract in Mexico basically, and had to finish up there. And so we had 2 days. We cranked out all the vignettes, and then I went down to Mexico while the vignettes played up in the States, and I went back down to Mexico to continue working. Yeah, Jenna Jameson she was in one of those vignettes. Jenna Jameson's a hot bird. There's no question about that. She was very professional there. A lot of people want these crazy stories and stuff, but she came in. She was very professional. We did our job, and then went and did our own thing after that.
What was the initial fan reaction you were getting when you debuted with that character? Because you were a heel, but the vignettes were pretty entertaining, so there's a lot of people that liked the character, from what I recall.
The character did not pan out the way we expected it to at the beginning. I think the way we all envisioned it, including Vince, was I was going to be harping on the guys while putting over their girlfriends and their wives. And I was supposed to create a division there. And so when I went out, I was dogging on the guys and I was hitting on their women. And Lo and behold, everybody, including the guys, loved it. But it was at a weird time in professional wrestling. I mean, you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, who, let's face it, if he was doing that character 10 years beforehand, he would have been a straight up heel. So it was kind of a weird time in professional wrestling, because you had these guys that were logically heels, but the heels were really becoming the new baby faces of professional wrestling. And the Val Venis character was designed to be a heel, but it looked like the fans were changing, and there was no fighting it. It was a babyface character.
And your first major angle was with Kai and Tai. Any memories of that?
Yeah, the Kai and Tai angle was that was a fun time in TV production. It was probably one of the most memorable aspects of WWE programming. I think it's something that not a lot of people are going to forget about, and to be a part of creating those memories for wrestling fans is definitely something I'm honored to be a part of. And working with Kai and Tai, I mean, those guys were all professionals, and hey, rest in peace, Mr. Yamaguchi-san. It was a pleasure working with you, my friend.
Jeff Jarrett was your first pay-per-view match. He was a pretty big star at that time. Any memories of working with him on that show?
I loved working with Jeff. Jeff was always he was a professional. He was a great worker. He was easy to work with. It wasn't like pulling teeth trying to get things done with Jeff. Jeff was always a consummate professional, and I enjoyed working with him from start to finish.
And John Wayne Bobbitt, I forgot to mention, this was part of the Kai and Tai angle. What was that like, having him involved in a storyline?
So, yeah, John Wayne Bobbitt, that's a character. Probably, I just got to say this, John Wayne Bobbitt is hands down probably one of the dumbest men I've ever met in my life. I don't really understand him. And, it's one of those things where he makes a lot of dick jokes non-stop, 24/7. It's one of those things where at first it's kind of funny, then it just kind of gets obnoxious, then it kind of gets to the point where you're just like, is this guy really alive? It's one of those things I don't understand the guy. I really don't. Working with him, I'm glad it was very short-lived working with him, and nothing really against the guy on a personal level, but the less I can talk to that man, the better it was for me.
I guess you weren't traveling to shows with him then?
No, I was not traveling to shows with John Wayne Bobbitt.
So you also worked with Dustin Rhodes when he was Goldust. How was that?
Working with Goldust was awesome. It was one of the highlights of my career. I learned a lot working with Goldust, a lot of things I never really thought about before in terms of slowing down inside the ring. He really helped me. I just have a natural desire to want to rush through different things and speed through things in the ring, and it's just the way I am as a natural human being, and it's something I constantly have to remind myself when I'm in the ring to, hey, slow down, let this sink in a little bit. And Dustin was somebody that, just watching him work and working with him at the same time, I watched how he slowed things down where it really made different parts of the match even better. And when you can see that happening, for some reason, it makes it easier to be able to control that urge to want to pick up the pace in the ring when you really need to slow it down a notch or two.
And you did a little angle with his then wife, Terry Reynolds. Was that awkward at all, or was it all just a job for you?
It was all just a job for me. Terry Reynolds is a beautiful woman. And she was very professional to work with. Both Dustin and Terry Reynolds were very, very professional.
What do you think about Dustin having a main event match at this upcoming All Elite Wrestling first pay-per-view against Cody?
All Elite Wrestling. I don't know a whole lot about it. I will say this. When I found out that Dustin was going to be working his brother at AEW, I became intrigued. It's something that I think it'd be a good kickoff. for that company. I don't know a whole lot about what's happening between AEW and WWE, if there's heat there or what's going on. But hey, you know, watching Cody go from being a rookie in WWE to then becoming a veteran in WWE to then really taking his career to new heights on the independents after leaving WWE and then becoming a promoter himself, it's going to make for one hell of a life story once he's retired, that's for sure. I wish Cody all the best. The guy's a smart dude, and I think if he keeps his head on straight and keeps focused, I think he could be one of those guys that gives Vince a run for his money. I don't think anybody should discount Cody Rhodes.
And apparently there is a bit of heat because WWE recently pulled Undertaker and Kurt Angle from the autograph session Starcast that's associated with AEW, I guess, due to seeing AEW as competition. And just before I get off that subject, would you ever consider being an agent or anything like that for a company like that that's only going to run, from what I understand from talking to Jim Ross, once a week?
Would I be an agent? Would I consider being an agent for AEW? Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, the wrestling business is in my blood. It's always going to be there. You know, and to see a new company come up and have somebody like Cody Rhodes at the helm who's got a vision for the company, you know, it'd be an honor to work there for sure. One thing I do want to take a look at as I go in and really find out what's going on with AEW. Like I said, I really don't know a whole lot about how AEW is being brought up, but just looking at past companies and analyzing those past companies and really what their downfalls were. And, you know, I could be wrong, but just from analyzing those, I would say the downfalls of past companies are there are too many heads pulling in the companies in different directions. And with WWE, you have one man, you have one vision, and that's Vince McMahon. And when you have that one vision for the company, and you have Vince McMahon saying, you either jump on this moving train and you help Vince McMahon reach his vision, or you step off the train, that really creates a vision that is focused for a company. And I think that's really what pushed WWE to become the biggest wrestling company in the world. When you take a look at WCW, TNA, and other small organizations that have come up as well, you see a lot of different heads that have a bunch of different visions for their particular company, and everybody's trying to pull the company in different directions. There's no clear-cut vision for what the company wants to accomplish, and you have some talent playing ball with this vision, you have some talent playing ball with this vision, and the company just gets torn apart. And I see that happen over and over and over again. And like I said, with WWE, it was one man, one vision, and you help that one man reach that vision or you step off the train. And if AEW can have one man, Cody Rhodes, and have his vision and have everyone else coming behind to make that vision a reality, you could probably have a very successful company. If the company falls back into the rut that other companies have fallen back into, where they bring other people that have been prominent in the business into the company, but they've been so prominent that they let them lead storylines in whatever direction they want, you're going to have more heads pulling the company in different directions and no clear-cut vision. And I think that's a big downfall for pro wrestling companies.
And you worked a lot with The Godfather as a tag team partner in your WWE run. Any thoughts on him?
Working with The Godfather is a blessing. I love Godfather. He's probably one of my favorite guys in the locker room. I loved working with him. It was like a night off every night working with him. He was a lot of fun to hang out with. He wasn't one of those, crazy party guys either. So, I just hang out with Godfather and chill, and nobody gets in trouble. We all get to the gym in the morning, work out hard, and So yeah, Godfather's definitely one of the guys that that I'll always look up to in pro wrestling for sure.
And you feuded with Ken Shamrock. A lot of people remember that feud. How was he to be in the ring with?
Working with Ken Shamrock was it was intense. Let's face it, the guy's probably one of the most intense guys to ever step into a WWE ring. You know, there are other real intense guys as well, but Shamrock, he was off the charts intense. And of course, working him, you could just probably the most intense that I have ever become inside the ring as well. There's something about a man's intensity that is over the top intense, and it just kind of rubs off on you. And I think it elevated my game a little bit to a higher level than it did prior to working with Ken Shamrock, and really taught me how to control intensity as well. Sometimes wrestling becomes so intense that you can kind of get off the path of what you're trying to accomplish inside the ring at that point in time. Working with Ken Shamrock, even though my intensity would go through the roof, working with Ken Shamrock, it was in a very controlled manner, which is something I'm pretty sure I lacked before working with Ken Shamrock. So if I could take anything away and make a solid claim right now of what I came away with working with Ken Shamrock, it was acquiring the skill of controlling intensity.
Did you enjoy the angle you did with Ryan Shamrock?
I absolutely enjoyed the angle I did with Ryan Shamrock. Ryan Shamrock was a phenomenal woman, beautiful. She was very, very professional, and I haven't talked to her in a long time. Don't know how she's doing now, but I know she had a kid. She got married, I guess, at one point, and yeah, she was really cool to work with. Really, really cool. I liked working with Ken Shamrock and Ryan Shamrock as well.
Now, you don't have to answer this, but I gotta throw it out anyways. Obviously, there's a lot of interaction, especially now with all the females in the dressing room, with romances with males and females. You actually did a lot of romance angles with WWE women. Was there anything more with any of the girls that you worked with over the years?
So romances in WWE were, yeah, and they still are a thing that's just going to happen. I mean, you have men and women there, and it's just, it's bound to happen. For me, no, I never really, got involved with any women in professional wrestling at that point. It was one of those things where I was there to do a job, and I had a lot of other things on my mind as well, very politically minded. So it was one of those things where my mind was always occupied with something other than, trying to get some.
And Missy Hyatt has said that a lot of her book was false. Is that story of Missy Hyatt's false, that you were once with her?
Yes, Missy Hyatt. I actually just saw her at a convention up in Newark. And so she came up to me and she goes, "Were you mad at me about putting that story in there?" And I was like, I don't really care. I don't really care what she says in her book, to tell you the truth. It's just, whatever it is what it is.
And you worked a lot with the Road Dogg. How was that, and what do you think about the position he has these days, as I think he's head writer of SmackDown?
Yeah, Road Dogg's he's tremendous talent. Road Dogg was always one of the best guys to have in the locker room, and I think a lot of that had to do with his ability to make people laugh. He was always very funny. His timing was impeccable, and he was one of those guys that when he walked into the locker room, within about 5 minutes, if the mood of that locker room was subdued, he was the guy to bring that mood up, and he did it every time. He was a likable guy. He was a funny guy. I don't think anybody had issues with Road Dogg. To watch him go through his career, to go from being a worker to going into some, let's see, some pretty tumultuous times for him. He had a failed marriage at the time. There was some addiction issues at the time, and to watch him bottom out and literally take control of his life and clean up and get to where he is now as one of the head writers in WWE. I think he actually just may have stepped down from head writer, from what I heard. I don't know whether that's true or not. But to watch him go from where he was to where he is now is an inspiration. It's an inspiration to a lot of wrestlers, I think.
And you worked with China as well, who's I guess now in the WWE Hall of Fame. How was your dealings with her?
China was a consummate professional. She was always a hard worker, somebody I truly admired. I mean, watching her work out in the gym, and I worked out with her several times in the gym, and let me tell you, she pushed hard in the gym, and obviously it showed in her physique as well. But she worked incredibly hard. Again, that China was another one that had left wrestling. Things had fallen apart at that point, and she fell to a let's just face it, it was probably the lowest point of her life at that point in time, not long after she left WWE. And then to watch her really try to dig herself out of that hole, and it looked like she was doing really well for a certain period of time. And then, of course, she ended up passing away. But working with China in WWE, hands down, was top-notch, professional all the way. She was somebody I looked up to during her time in WWE.
And did you have any interactions with Sunny behind the scenes?
Sunny is a character. I think Sunny's crazy. I think, I hope
Well,
Sunny...
she is legitimately crazy now.
Yes, yeah. I think Sunny's always had a little bit of a craziness issue. I like Sunny. I just think she's crazy. I think she's completely off her rockers. There are times. I'll give you one little story about Sunny. There was a time that Mark Henry and I were sitting at the commentating table during the daytime before the doors open, and we had the headsets on, and we're just joking around, right? And Sunny had walked up to me and pulled the ear thing off of my head and leaned down and whispered into my ear and said, "I'm into bondage." And I jumped up, threw my headset off, and I went, "Whoa, that's way more than I needed to know." And Mark Henry's sitting beside me going, "What'd she say? What'd she say?" And so that was that was a little bit of a kicker with Sunny, but she was crazy. I mean, she was one of those that pushes the envelope all the time, and she did it in WWE programming, push the envelope, and she also pushed the envelope a little too far in her real life as well. She's obviously paying a pretty hard price right now for some of those decisions. She's got to get better at making better decisions. Otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, she's got a foot in the grave. And of course, we all know where that leads.
And I have to ask you, because of your character, if you watched her porn video.
No, I have not watched Sunny's porn video. I don't know if I can bring myself to do it. I think it's different when you know the person. And it was the same thing with China's porn video. I can't bring myself to watch it.
Yeah, that's understandable. Now, Paige didn't make porn videos, but she had some highly controversial videos released. Did you see any clips of those that were all over the internet about a year or so ago?
I saw Paige's porn video completely by accident. I was at a show, I believe it was in Chicago, and I walked into the locker room, and sure enough, there's a laptop open with that video playing, and I went, whoa! And yeah, so I accidentally viewed about maybe 6 or 7 seconds of that video. It was one of those things where I stopped and I looked at it, and I'm guessing about 5, 6, 7 seconds, maybe, I don't know, maybe even 10 seconds. I kind of shook my head and realized, oh shoot, I'm watching this, and turned around and walked away. But yeah, I did actually get a glimpse of it. Am I surprised that WWE kept Paige on after the video's release? No, not so much. WWE it's a business. And so if you can, take some lemons and squeeze them and get some nice fresh lemon juice, why not? I think Paige is a moneymaker. And so, yeah, she had a sex tape that came out. Yeah, it definitely wasn't her fault. And number two, if she's making money for the company, keep her. That's what the company's there to make money. If the company's not making money, people don't have jobs. If people don't have jobs, they don't have a roof over their head. So, you know, when WWE looks at, you know, certain talent, if you're making that company money, yeah, definitely firing somebody over a sex tape when you're making that company money is I don't think would be a wise decision.
And you worked a lot with The Rock, who I guess a lot of people would say is the most successful wrestler of all time. What was it like being in the ring with him?
Being in the ring with The Rock was a lot of fun. It was like another night off. Let's face it, Rock's not the greatest wrestler in the world. When I say it's a night off working with The Rock, it's because he does most of the work, and most of his work is stick work. And so to get in there with Rock, it wasn't like he's a really great wrestler. He knows very basic moves, but he knows how to do those things well. And so it was always a night off working with The Rock, and it was an honor to work with him. It was a pleasure to work with him, and if that guy could have a good match with pretty much anybody, and it was an honor working with The Rock.
How did you find him behind the scenes?
What you see with Rock on TV is basically him amplified 100 times. Rock's always been a super, super nice guy, very, very professional, probably one of the most professional guys that I've ever seen in the locker room, and a go-getter. The guy is nonstop. He's constantly working, and that's really one of the main ingredients to success is you don't stop moving. You keep your goals focused, and every decision you make all day long throughout life should be decisions made that will help you obtain your ultimate goal. And Rock was one of the guys that did that day in and day out all day long. He kept moving. He kept making decisions every day, all day long, even little decisions, in ways that would propel him towards his goals. And that's something I think a lot of people can learn from is his tenacity towards constantly trying to achieve goals.
And how was working with Mankind?
Mankind, he's a character, let me tell you. Mankind was another really easy guy to work. Super easy to work in the ring. Really doesn't do a whole lot of wrestling in the ring. A lot of storytelling, which is a lot of fun to engage in. A lot of comedy as well. Had a lot of fun working with Mick Foley. He is a Democrat though, and so I don't think he's very political, but he is a Democrat, and so that's a negative. That's a negative against you, Mick Foley. Negative.
And Steve Austin, you're well remembered for your matches with him, and you fought him on the SmackDown main event on one of the episodes of SmackDown when it was hitting ratings peaks. Any memories of working with him?
Yeah, working with Austin was a challenge in intensity once again. It goes back to the intensity of Chris Benoit. If it came to matching someone's intensity with Chris Benoit, definitely Stone Cold Steve Austin would be up there. Getting in the ring with Steve Austin was a test in cardio. It was one of those things where even with Benoit, for some reason, I would never blow up working with Benoit, even though we would be going 100 miles an hour. With Austin, for some reason, it was one of those things where by the end of the match, I was blown sky high. And I loved working Austin. The intensity was there. I don't think the intensity was any more than it would be with Chris Benoit, but for some reason, I always seemed a lot more blown up by the time I was done a match with Austin. I don't know whether it had a lot more to do with facials and expressions inside the ring combined with professional. I'm not sure exactly why I was blown up more with Austin than I was with Benoit, but there was a significant difference in how much energy I was using working with Austin than I was working with Benoit.
And I've heard Steve didn't have a big ego for the star that he was in those days. Is that true from what you experienced?
Yeah, I don't think Steve had too much of an ego at all. I think he was there to make money, and he was there to work hard, and that's what he did. I think he did an incredible job, really garnering the attention of the fans, the respect of the fans, and of course, putting asses in the seats and selling tickets benefited all of us.
And you worked with the British Bulldog a few times. How was he in the ring?
British Bulldog was easy to work. He was, been around for years and years at that point in time, and so to get in the ring with him was another night off. There was so many guys that were so easy to work in there. I will say this though, to watch the British Bulldog move around in that ring when you're in the ring with him, as opposed to watching him move around as a fan outside of the ring. He was an imposing figure. He was definitely an imposing figure in WWE, and to watch him move in that ring was, I guess you could say, classical in a way. He was very much the classic British Bulldogs type of. I'm trying to really find the words for it. When I think of British Bulldogs, I'm thinking classical 1980s wrestling. And the way they move, the way they talk, the way they present themselves inside that ring, and to watch that reenacted with the British Bulldog when I was in the ring with them, it was like a dream come true. It was really awesome.
And you worked with Kurt Angle a lot. He's another guy that I would guess you may have exerted a lot of energy wrestling.
With Kurt Angle, you would be surprised. That's another guy. So right now, you've mentioned three guys that I would consider the three top most intense guys in WWE. You got Chris Benoit, Steve Austin, and of course now Kurt Angle. With Kurt Angle, he was another guy that I never really blew up in the ring working with him, and it was odd. It's something I've thought about several times over the years. I didn't blow up too much with Benoit, didn't blow up too much with Kurt Angle. With Steve Austin, a couple of times that I worked him, I was blown sky high, and I could never figure out why that was, because all three of those guys are equally intense, and working with Angle was easy. It was solid. You knew you were getting in there and you were going to come out roughed up, but it was fun. It was one of those matches where it makes the fans question, is this really going on? Is this real, what I'm watching? And when you can make fans question that, you're doing your job really well. And I think we did that very well when it was Kurt Angle and myself.
What do you think about his recent retirement at WrestleMania this year?
To watch Kurt Angle retire, I think it's reminds you of how precious time is. Time goes so fast. It still feels like yesterday that he started, and to watch him, hang up the boots, it's a reminder. Hey, time moves, and it moves fast, and it's not stopping for anyone.
Another one of the all-time greats that you worked with was Eddie Guerrero. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, Eddie Guerrero was a stellar performer. The guy was off the charts amazing. We had some tremendous matches over the years, and man, he was one of the guys I got into the ring with, and even before that match was over, I was already looking forward to getting into the ring with that guy again. He was one of those guys that when you walked into the arena, you were praying you'd see your name next to his on the card. And every time I did, it was, yes, I got Eddie Guerrero. And so, working Eddie was phenomenal. I think we gelled. We had some really good chemistry. And we really didn't have a whole lot of material planned out. Whenever I had to work Eddie, most of it was just off the fans, just playing off the fans. And he was just that easy of a guy to work.
And a lot of people enjoyed when you were working with Trish Stratus, with her as your manager. How was that, and do you think they could have gone longer with that?
Working with Trish was an honor. I remember when Trish first came into WWE, and she was a go-getter. She wanted to learn. She was willing to put in the time, and she did it. She became one of the top female wrestlers in WWE history. The time I spent with her was really incredible. It was, she's a beautiful woman, and she garnered attention, and she was always wanting to be a part of whatever was happening in the ring. Now there were times when Test and her would butt heads, and that was always entertaining for me because Test was his own man and Trish was her own woman, and to watch those two butt heads they were like walking home entertainment centers for the big Val Boski is what they were. I would just sit back and eat popcorn and watch these two fight. But as far as working with Trish, it was awesome. She's a tremendous performer, very professional. She always got done what she needed to get done, and she did everything really well.
Were you close with Test?
Test was one of my best friends in WWE. I was very close with him, yeah.
I guess when he passed away, that was probably pretty shocking to you.
Yeah, when Test passed away, that was a dark moment in my life. It was one of those things you don't realize how hard something like that hits you until it actually hits you, and it's I don't know, man. Still, that's even hard to talk about even today. I mean, Test was a big, healthy dude, and the pills, man, those pills, they got him. I mean, what else can you say? It is what it is. The pills got him, and just like they've gotten so many others, and it's always hard. But when it happens to one of your best friends, it's, man, yeah, I mean, you're at a loss for words.
And shortly after the Trish Stratus group, you joined the Right to Censor. Is that something you were happy with doing?
The Right to Censor would not have been my choice. Not something I particularly enjoyed doing. I understood the political motivations behind it because we did have the Parental Television Council that were lobbying advertisers of WWE Raw to pull their advertising revenue from WWE programming, and that was the PTC. So I understood Vince's idea of mocking the PTC with the RTC, and so politically I understood it, but did I enjoy doing it? Absolutely not. I work hard in that ring. I sweat a lot, and to wear long pants with a shirt and a tie and sweat as much as I do, did not like it at all. And it was getting away from the Val Venis character, which I loved performing the Val Venis character.
Yeah, because there was rumors going around that you actually didn't want to do the Val Venis character anymore. I don't know if you probably are aware of that, but so that's false.
Yeah, no, I never wanted to stop doing the Val Venis character. I always wanted to do the Val Venis character. I did want to take it in other directions, but the core, excuse me, the core of the Val Venis character I wanted to keep intact. And there were just other storylines that I wanted to pursue. And it seemed like when Vince Russo left, to me, on my end, it felt like the rug got pulled out from the Val Venis character, and it was shortly after that we started moving towards more of a PG company.
And you worked with The Undertaker. I'm guessing that was probably one of the highlights of your career.
Yeah, working Undertaker was definitely a highlight. I think any pro wrestler, especially coming up through that time, they always had a goal of getting in the ring with The Undertaker. And so, yeah, it was an honor to work with Undertaker, and it's something I cherish. Yeah, he's easy to work, very professional, and something I definitely cherish for the rest of my life.
And you returned under the old Val Venis gimmick in 2002, and you had some matches with Mr. Perfect. What was he like to be in the ring with?
Mr. Perfect was another one of those guys that I would consider one of the top performers in the industry. When he was the Intercontinental Champion years before I was. He was somebody I looked up to. He was one of those technical guys. That's one thing I liked about the IC title is it always seemed to be the very best technical wrestlers that would go for that IC title, and Mr. Perfect was one of those guys. And to get into the ring with a guy that I always looked up to for his wrestling ability, not so much for his character. I really didn't care for the character too much. I thought it was a cool character, but at most that was about it. But his wrestling ability was something I very much admired. And, he was very, very confident in the ring, very confident in executing different moves, great drop kick when he would, send a guy off into the ropes and he'd take that one step up into a 2-foot drop kick, and it just looked so effortless. And he was just one of those guys I always watched and studied and tried to emulate in many different ways.
Were you on that flight with him when he had that amateur match with Brock Lesnar?
I was not on the flight that saw Brock Lesnar and Curt Hennig get into a little scrap. I was not on that flight. I did hear all the stories, but unfortunately I was not on that flight.
What happened there? Because I actually never heard the stories really, other than the rumors about it.
Yeah, so from what I understand is they had some words. Not exactly sure what those words specifically were, because I've heard a bunch of different stories as to what those words were. But we'll just go along with there were some words. And of course, they both got in each other's faces. And the next thing that I was told happened was they were locked up and they were, I guess, slamming each other into the emergency exit door. And it was a little worrisome for some passengers on that plane for a certain period of time. And I don't know the whole story behind it. As like I said, I've heard a bunch of different stories as to what led up to the ruckus. But yeah, apparently when they were fighting, when they were locking horns, they were smashing into that exit door. I guess an emergency exit door.
I guess that was why Hennig got released at that time, but he probably could have gone for a while longer, couldn't he have, with the shape he was in?
Yeah, I think Curt Hennig could have gone for several more years. The guy was always in incredible shape, and he was one of those guys that he put in the time, and he always set goals, and he did everything all day long, making decisions that would lead him towards the goals that he set. And so he was just one of those guys that was always in top-notch shape.
And you teamed with Edge for a while. I guess he was your brother-in-law at the time?
Yeah, Edge was my brother-in-law for several years there. He was married to my sister for a lot of years. And Edge and I tagged a few times, yeah.
How was that, and do you still talk to Edge?
Yeah, working with Edge was really good. It was Edge is one of those guys, very, very creative, comes up with a lot of good ideas. He's passionate about pro wrestling like no other, and working with him was really incredible. When I found out that him and my sister were getting divorced, it was one of those things where I was saddened by it. It was that they were butting heads. I kind of had an inkling they were going to get divorced just because they're two very stubborn people, and it's two stubborn people. Neither one of them are going to budge, and so that was really just a matter of time in my view. But Edge and I I haven't talked to him in a long, long time, but every once in a while, we'll run into each other and say hey and what's up, and yeah.
And you had some matches with Chris Jericho. Any thoughts on that and the star that he's become in recent years?
Yeah, Chris Jericho's another guy he's built a brand, and he's continued to build that brand. He's passionate about pro wrestling, and he makes decisions based on what goals he sets for himself. He makes those decisions all day long, even little decisions. All day long, he's one of those guys that sets a goal, and every decision he makes throughout the day is a decision that's going to lead him closer to reaching his goals. And of course, he's set many different goals throughout his life. Becoming a rock star, boom, done. Becoming a pro wrestler, boom, done. I mean, this guy knows the ingredients to success, and he does it all the time.
And you worked with Batista in his earlier days, and he went on to become a big star in wrestling as well as the movies. Any thoughts on him and what it was like to be in the ring with him?
Yeah, Batista was the beast. He was a beast, no question about it. He was he looks like $1 billion. Always a professional dude. Always a guy another guy he sets goals and he makes decisions every day, all day long. And those decisions that he makes are going to be based on what's going to lead him to his goals. And you can see how that's worked for him as well. Everything he tries to do, he succeeds in. And to watch him become a huge star in Guardians of the Galaxy and in WWE as well, it's incredible to see these guys really obtain the goals that they set for themselves. And I think, people should really be looking up to people like that.
And I remember around the time that you wrestled Batista, I had a WWE tryout at the same time as Bobby Roode, and he told me you had gotten him the tryout. Could you tell us about your relationship with Bobby Roode?
Yeah, so Bobby Roode. So I used to work at a bar in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada called the Purple Rooster, and I was a doorman there. Bobby Roode was also a doorman there. Now, when I left, and that's how I knew Bobby, we worked together quite a bit, for quite a while, actually. When I left Canada and started wrestling full-time, went to England, then it was Arkansas, then it was Puerto Rico, so I was gone for a lot of years. When Shane and I, Shane Sewell, who's my tag partner in Puerto Rico, decided to take a summer off and come back to Canada and get our feet wet in promoting. We had never promoted wrestling shows before, so we decided we were going to try and promote a show up in Bancroft, Ontario, Canada. One of the things we needed was security. So I reached out to Bobby Roode, who I hadn't talked to in a few years at that point. And I said, "Hey, Bobby, are you still working at the bars?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Hey, do you want to get some doormen together and come up and do security at my wrestling show?" And he was like, "Yeah, I can get that done for you." So Bobby kind of became the head security guy for my wrestling show in Bancroft, Ontario, Canada. And we did the wrestling show, and right afterwards, Bobby came up to me and he says, "Hey man, can you teach me how to do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be here for the summer before I got to head back to Puerto Rico, so I'll set the ring up at my dad's house in his backyard, and we'll train you there." And so Bobby came up to my dad's house, and I started training him in the ring there. And he picked it up super fast. Super fast he picked the basics up. I mean, probably one of the fastest guys to pick up the very basics of professional wrestling that I've ever run into. I mean, flat back bumps, the very first time he did it, boom, and he just did it again and again and again. And it was just, picked it up faster than anybody I've ever seen pick it up. And from there, I went back down to Puerto Rico, and I guess he made his way out to, I believe it was Scott D'Amore's, I could be wrong, but I think it was Scott D'Amore's organization at the time, and he continued training under Scott D'Amore's group. And then at that point in time, Shane had spoken with Carlos Colon down in Puerto Rico, and had got him shot down in Puerto Rico as well. And from there, he just started working and taking off. And he was just one of those guys that he saw wrestling what it was, and he was already somewhat of a gymnast anyway, so doing athletic things was just natural to him. And he picked it up super fast, and he had a passion for it, still has a passion for the business today. And to see him become a huge star in TNA, and now has moved over into WWE, and keep our fingers crossed that they send him to the moon in WWE. He's definitely got the talent and the skills to make that happen. So just keeping my eyes open and seeing what the company does with him.
And there's a story online, apparently you got a severe injury from some gym equipment falling on you.
Yeah, that was quite a while ago. I was doing some rows on the cable machine, and I guess the bolts, I don't know whether they had a flood in the place or whatever the case it was, but the bolts that had bolted the machine into the ground, I don't know whether they rusted or what over time, but they snapped. And as I was pulling, the whole weight stack was at the top of the weight stack, because I had already pulled the weight close to my chest here. And when I had it close to the chest, the bolts had snapped, and the whole machine just came straight down on my head in the blink of an eye. And it cut my head wide open, really messed up my neck pretty bad. And that was a scary time.
Did the gym owners take care of you in that situation, I guess?
It was one of those things where, it was in Canada. They have a healthcare system up there. I'm not a big, hey, let's go and sue this guy type thing. It was one of those things where, accidents are accidents. I was going to heal, and I'd be fine and move on to it. The gym owner, however, I was obviously going to be out of wrestling and not earning money for several weeks at that point. And at the time I was just get the stitches in, get the swelling down, get back on the road as fast as possible. But it was the gym owner that came to me and said, hey, listen, I pay insurance premiums for this. I said, if you're losing money in wrestling, here's the insurance number, get a lawyer and give that to him. And so that's when I started thinking about it and started thinking, I am losing a lot of money here, taking time off of wrestling. Maybe I should do this. And so we went after the insurance company for the amount of money that I did lose, but nothing more.
And you worked in Angle with Eric Bischoff, I guess, after you came back from that injury. How was it like working with him?
Eric's a professional, man. Eric's a businessman, very, very professional, knowledgeable, and passionate about, doing everything he does extremely well. And to work with Eric was an honor, and is something I would love to work with Eric again going forward in the future at some point in time doing something. I think he's so multifaceted. I think there's a lot of different things that Eric could be useful for going forward for sure.
Did he have a lot of heat when he made the jump to WWE?
Did Eric have a lot of heat when he made to WWE? Not that I know of. It was one of those things where, when Eric came into WWE, I think it was more of a shock factor at first. Like, whoa, really? The guy that's literally almost put WWE out of business, maybe not out of business, but certainly was, making Vince shaking his boots for several weeks. Bro, it was like 80 some odd weeks he was beating us in ratings. And to see him in WWE now, and then of course you take a step back and you're like, well, this is professional wrestling. It is a business. It is about making money. That's controversy. And controversy creates cash. So it made perfect sense. But yeah, when you're not thinking about the business aspect of it, you're only thinking about the storyline aspect of it. Yeah, you take a step back and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And then you're thinking, oh yeah, it's just money.
Was there ever any WCW offers to you around the time that your first contract with WWE was before? I think it was 3 years you said, so there was a period of time where you possibly could have jumped?
Not while I was in WWE.
Okay.
Before I signed with WWE, I already had the Des Moines, Iowa tryout match booked with WWE several weeks in advance. And before I had the opportunity to perform in front of WWE, I did get the opportunity to perform on the dark match in Nitro in Cincinnati. And so they flew me out of Mexico, WCW did, and I went and did the match. And now Eric says he doesn't remember meeting me, and that may be true. It was back in a time, I had long bleach blonde hair coming out of Mexico at the time, and he had seen so many different talents. Of course, the Val Venis character wasn't even created at that point in time. I was still just known as Sean Morley or Steel from Mexico. In fact, I think I was originally introduced to him as Sean Morley, Steel from Mexico. I believe that's how I was introduced to him. But yeah, we talked a little bit, and then I was basically at the end of that little hoopla of a meeting, I guess. I was told basically, well, I understand you have your meeting with WWE in a few weeks, and the last thing I was told, whatever WWE offers you, at least call us and give us the opportunity to match it. And I never did. I went when I was offered the WWE contract. I took that contract, and I think a lot of that had to do at the time is I probably would have gone back and forth and negotiated. One thing I noticed was with the WWE locker room, there wasn't really any tension in the locker room. The guys were all really cool. Everybody was getting along. Obviously, you have, your talent, having disagreements and whatever, but that's just normal. When I was in the WCW locker room at the time, it seemed very, very cliquish. It seemed like you could cut the tension with a knife. And I felt very uncomfortable in that business environment. And so just sitting, and I remember Jericho was one of the guys that walked up to me after I had done my dark match. I had been introduced to Bischoff and I had come back to the locker room. Jericho came up to me and he goes, "Don't come here, man. Don't come here." And it was one of those things, if WWE makes you that offer, go there. He was one of the guys that, and I never really asked him why he was saying that. I just kind of assumed I could feel what was going on in the locker room. There was cliques, and these cliques weren't just normal little friends cliques. These cliques there was a lot of tension between them. At least that's the feeling I got. And it was very uncomfortable. And I compared that to the WWE locker room, and I felt very, very comfortable there. And so that was one of the reasons I did not negotiate back and forth, or at least give WCW the opportunity to match it. I just, I negotiated with WWE only, and we came to a deal, and I took it.
And I highly doubt you would have become as big of a star if you had gone to WCW, because they had very few homegrown stars. And as you said, with all the cliques fighting for positions, a new guy isn't going to have much of a chance.
True. I think going to WCW, I probably would have been lost in the crowd. And during that competitive time, obviously WCW was trying to lock up talent so WWE wouldn't get that talent. And like I said, I felt a lot more comfortable in the WWE locker room than I did in the WCW locker room, and a lot of that had to do with the cliques that were all jockeying for position. And again, that goes back to having so many different heads in a company pulling the company in different directions, and it takes away from what really should be a clear-cut vision for the company. If you don't have a clear-cut vision for the company, there's nothing for the fans to grab onto. You got some fans that'll grab onto this vision, you got some fans that'll grab onto that vision, you got some fans that'll grab onto this vision, and everybody just gets torn apart. And so the one thing I saw with WWE was you had Vince McMahon's vision, and you had all the talent, all the producers, and all the employees getting in behind Vince to help him develop that vision. The fans understood that vision because there's only one vision. They recognized that vision, they understood it, and they loved it. And that's what I think makes a company really gel with the fans. When the fans understand what the vision is, they agree with the vision, they enjoy that vision, it's not confusing to them, and it sells tickets. They're more than willing to give the money for those tickets to enjoy that vision. But when you have a company that's got 4, 5, 6 different visions, fans don't know what to grab onto, and I think that's a big downfall for professional wrestling companies.
And you teamed with Lance Storm in the latter part of your WWE career. How was that?
Lance Storm's one of the best technical wrestlers that I've ever gotten to the ring with. Hands down a consummate professional, straight up guy. Always running that straight and narrow path. And one of the fun times I always had with Lance was never letting him know that he throws one of the best drop kicks in the business. And always, one thing I always admired was a really good drop kick. Something I could do okay drop kick is what I could do at best. It was just something no matter how much I tried, I could never throw a really good drop kick. And it was something I always wanted to. So I always admired that about Lance, but I would never let him know that. In fact, I would shoot a guy off the ropes and say, "Hey, drop kick," and I'd hit the drop kick, and I'd look right at Lance like I just threw the best drop kick in the world. I go, "That's how it's done, buddy." And of course, he would tag me in, and he would shoot the guy off, and he'd throw a way better drop kick than me, but I would never tell him that, right? I'd roll my eyes up and go, whatever. And so, yeah, I taught Lance Storm how to drop kick. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And you had a match with Jerry Lawler, who's one of the big legends of the wrestling business. Any thoughts on that match?
Yeah, working Jerry Lawler, that was a lot of fun. Never really thought that match would ever happen. It did happen, and if I do remember correctly, I put Jerry over in that match, and I was more than happy to do that. Jerry's one of those classics. I mean, just to be one of those guys that gets into the ring with Jerry Lawler and performs with him is an honor, and it's something that I'll take to my grave with me. I'll cherish that moment for the rest of my life.
And I guess you're partly responsible for CM Punk getting his WWE job, as his tryout match was with you. Any memory of that match, and what are your thoughts on his career?
I think CM Punk is tremendous talent. He's one of those guys that when he came in and he was going to do the tryout match with me, the one thing I've always been big on is telling a story inside the ring, especially in the latter parts of my career. I really wanted to focus on just telling very simple stories inside the ring. And when CM Punk came into WWE to do that dark match, he wasn't under contract yet. They just wanted to take a look at him. I was letting CM Punk know, I said, hey, listen, no one knows who you are at this point in time. Let's just do a babyface match, and then we'll turn you heel during the match. So we'll create that division in the fans. We'll make them hate you with a passion. And then work my leg. We'll tell a story. Take out my knee, work my leg. We'll tell that story. We won't do these triple moonsaults with a half twist. We'll just tell a real basic story. And so we went out there and we did a babyface match. Finally, we shake hands. We do a couple 1-2 kicks out and blah, 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 square off. We get the big clap. We go to shake hands. And when I go, clap my hands, and I turn around and walk away, he chop blocks my knee out of nowhere. And the fans immediately turned on him. They had no idea who CM Punk was before he chop blocked out my knee from behind. And now they hate him like that. And it was one of those things where he went straight into work mode at that point. He chop blocked my knee, and the entire match he went laser focused on my knee, and we told the story where my knee's messed up, and he's working it, not doing anything really extravagant like you would see bump after bump after bump, moonsaults, and all these crazy moves. He literally just worked my knee. And then we made a little comeback. We kept that storyline that my knee was messed up, and the next thing you know, he's signing a contract and becoming a talent in WWE. And it was shortly after that he took that moonshot ride right to the very top of the WWE.
And it looks like, I know he made an appearance last weekend in wrestling, but I think his MMA career might be over. Who knows if he'll ever come back to wrestling or not. What do you think about his decision to kind of drop out when he was at the peak of his wrestling career?
For CM Punk to want to leave wrestling and pursue MMA, I think it's an honorable move. I think as long as he definitely saved his money and is financially secure, making that move to MMA, it's his dream. It's something he's always wanted to do. The fact that he got in there twice and did much better in the second time than he did in the first time, you can still see that he doesn't have the experience that the other guys have in MMA, but he definitely a significant improvement over his first fight compared to the second fight. I hope he fights again. I really do. If he's still in there training like he's only training 2 years at that point after his second fight. That's nothing. I'd like to see him fight after 5 years. Now some people say, well, there's the age as well. Okay, but is it really about CM Punk winning, or is it about seeing him get better?
And of course, as you said, he could fight another older fighter. He doesn't have to fight 20-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, watching CM Punk fight, I don't think you're looking at CM Punk to fight for a championship match. I just don't think he's got that experience. But to see him fight other people that are in his same age group, or that have maybe a similar type of in-cage experience as he does, and to watch his skills improve, I really think that's something worth watching. That whether he wins or loses, I think is irrelevant when it comes to watching his career. I think just watching the constant improvements would be an inspiration to a lot of people.
Now, you had a very successful WWE run over a decade, but when I announced to my fans that I was going to be doing this interview, overwhelmingly, they all wanted to know about what your opinion on how you were supposedly misused in the last part of your WWE run. I understand that there's just different roles on the card for everyone, and you were probably paid very well for your last few years, but what are your thoughts on how you were used?
So the first several years in WWE, I was very, very happy with the way I was used. Obviously, they were pushing me, and it was one of those things where I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. Once we got into the RTC stuff, it became a job at that point. I was like, I don't want to do this, but I'll do it. Understanding the political reasons behind it, I reluctantly agreed to do the RTC gimmick. When I was tagging with Godfather, I think that was something where the ball was dropped. I think we could have done a lot more with that, the supply and demand tag team. So I was a little disappointed in them not really pushing that one to where I really think we could have gone. And we could have been a really fun tag team for a long time. So I was a little disappointed in that. Coming back to the Val Venis character where when Vince Russo was gone, it just wasn't the same. I mean, the writers in WWE, once Vince Russo left, were comic book guys. These were guys that were into comic book characters. And the Val Venis character was definitely not a comic book character. And so we didn't have any writers that were, capable of writing for the Val Venis character. At the same time, you had WWE as a company moving towards more of a family-friendly environment, moving towards that PG area. So there were a lot of things working against a envelope-pushing Val Venis character. And so, yeah, I would say probably the last half of my career in WWE, I was a little disappointed with character development. Yeah, it wasn't a disappointment enough to where, I would say I got to get up and leave. But the thought did cross my mind several times.
And you worked for New Japan Pro Wrestling after your WWE release. How was that?
I always loved wrestling in Japan. Japan's a phenomenal territory to wrestle in. Working for New Japan was an honor. I felt like I really wasn't in the best wrestling shape when I was in Japan, and you really have to be in top-notch shape when you go over there. I was kind of in a position still where I had, just healed up from shoulder surgery, so I still had a long way to go before I was actually ring ready. I was in Japan before I was ring ready at that point. And but I still had a lot of fun over there. It was, Japan's awesome to work in.
And you were a participant in Hulk Hogan's big Australia tour. How was that?
Yeah, wrestling the Hulkamania tour in Australia was a lot of fun. Probably one of the funnest tours that I've ever been on. And I look forward to one day doing another tour just like that. You had Rikishi on there, Godfather, which obviously Godfather and I hanging out, it was awesome, always is. So many guys were on that tour that made the tour so fun. The Nasty Boys were there. They're like walking home entertainment centers. And I smoked a lot of Australian weed down there too, let me tell you. There's some good growers. There's some good cannabis cultivators in Australia. You just got to find them. And yeah, we found them.
Did you have any personal interaction with Hulk on that tour?
Yeah, Hulk and I, we talked quite a bit on that tour, actually. Hulk's always a professional. He was very, very businesslike on that tour. And we had some really good conversations on that tour. Like I said, that tour, hands down, was one of the funnest tours I've ever been on.
Hulk is a cannabis user too, isn't he? He's talked about it.
I believe Hulk is a cannabis user. I could be wrong. Don't hold me to that. I've never smoked marijuana with Hulk. I've never asked him about it. I'm going to assume he is.
Supposedly he's been quoted as saying a day without weed is like a day without sunshine.
I will tell you this. Like all wrestlers, Hulk has had his issues with pain pills. He had bad back, bad knees. Like a lot of wrestlers, myself included, the pain pill thing is doctors give it to you and it's a prescription, right? You think it's okay, even though we know the issues with our friends that have gone down that addiction path. It's still, when a doctor gives it to you, you think there's something legitimate about it. There's something safe about it. There's nothing safe about it. You're going to be a lot safer getting marijuana from the local gangster down at the local corner of the local hood than you are going to the pharmacy to buy a clean pharmaceutical opiate pill. It's just one of those things where if Hulk is promoting weed, rather than opiates, hands down, he's got my support 110%. I think more athletes should be doing that. I think marijuana, if you're looking at it responsibly and you're looking at it through the glasses of facts and logic, pain pills should be second and maybe even third attempt at reducing pain. Cannabis should be the number one option, the first thing you go to when you're trying to reduce pain or trying to change your perception of pain. If cannabis works for you, I would stay at that level. And if it doesn't work for you, then maybe think about taking something stronger, and of course something that has, more issues with it, and that would be opiates. But I think cannabis should be the first stop in the road to managing pain and aches and things like that. But it's not. In today's society, your first stop really for managing pain is opiates. And if opiates become a problem for you, if you get addicted to them or anything like that, well then maybe if you can find a doctor that's not afraid of losing his license, maybe he'll recommend cannabis. But it's asked backwards. It really should be the other way around. Cannabis should be the first stop, and if that fails, then move up to opiates.
And you had a brief run in TNA wrestling. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, my brief run in TNA wrestling was a disappointment. I was thoroughly disappointed. Number one, again, I wasn't ring ready at the time. It was one of those things where I wasn't in the best shape of my life, but that was regardless of my issues with TNA. When I went down to TNA, it fell right back into a company where I saw a bunch of different heads with different visions for one company. And so, you had Jeff Jarrett with a vision to pull the company in one direction. You had Hulk with a vision to pull the company in another direction. You had, there were a bunch of different heads trying to pull a company in different directions. And when that happens, you tend to find the cliques in the company, and you tend to find tension in the air. And so it was one of those things where as soon as I see the different heads trying to pull the company in different directions, I've pretty much summed up or come to the conclusion that company's days are numbered.
And I'm going to ask you a couple of live fan questions here. Some fan is asking what your favorite match was.
So my favorite match in WWE, there's so many of them. It's hard to really pinpoint one. I can name a couple, like 98 SummerSlam against D'Lo Brown was a standout match. Of course, all my matches with Rikishi, including the cage match where he came off the top of the cage and landed on my tremendous carcass. And that was an awesome match. The matches that I had with Chris Benoit and with Ken Shamrock as well, those were awesome. As far as do I have a favorite match, it's hard to say. Most memorable, I would say the two most memorable would be Rikishi coming off the cage, definitely that match, and SummerSlam 98. It was my first time wrestling in Madison Square Gardens, and it just so happened to be a pay-per-view. And so that was two standout matches for me right there.
And is there any segment that you were in that stands out?
Any segment that I was in that stands out? Yes, the segment that really stands out for me, and it had nothing really to do with wrestling other than the fact that this segment that I'm about to share with you led into a wrestling match. And a lot of your fans may remember this. I believe it was called GTV at the time, and I was in the restroom taking a piss right next to the Big Show, who was also taking a piss. And I kind of leaned over to Big Show, kind of looked down, and then looked up at him and said, "And they call you the Big Show?" And of course, Big Show finishes his business, does up his zipper, turns around, and then grabs me by the back of the head and launches me right into a wall. And when I heard the arena, the fans in unison inside that arena just bust out laughing, I was like, that was one badass moment in WWE programming right there. Very, very memorable.
And another fan question is, what are the chances of Donald Trump abolishing the Federal Reserve?
What are the chances of Donald Trump abolishing the Federal Reserve? That would be that would be hands down the number one thing that any human being on the face of God's green earth could do to benefit America. The Federal Reserve, it's a bunch of criminals that have a product called the U.S. Federal Reserve Note. We tokenize the value of our labor in that Federal Reserve Note. We expect the value of our labor to be protected by that Federal Reserve Note. But what happens? Those central bankers at the Federal Reserve turn on the printing presses and they literally create more currency, more Federal Reserve notes out of thin air. When they do that, it's called counterfeiting. When they do that, the value that you trusted would be protected inside that US dollar, like a ghost, gets sucked out of that US dollar. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it will take more of your US dollars to buy the things that you would have bought with less US dollars the day before. And so where did that value go? The value, literally like a ghost, gets sucked out of the US dollar that you already worked for and gets placed into the new dollars that are being printed by the central bankers. Well, what do they do with that value? They go and they give it to their crony friends in terms of loans, or they go and buy themselves mansions, or the businesses or media companies. So the value that you have protected in that US dollar is literally being stolen from you, and you still see a dollar sitting in front of your face thinking nothing's been stolen. The value of your labor that you placed and trusted would be protected in that US dollar is getting sucked out of that US dollar by central bankers. They're literally stealing it from you. So for Donald Trump to ban the Federal Reserve and abolish them and get rid of them, and have solid money like a Bitcoin, or it'll be some kind of cryptocurrency, or a gold or silver, something where no banker can go and print more of it and steal the value of your labor. I think that's the best thing that could ever happen to America. It's the best thing that could ever happen to anybody that actually works and exchanges their labor for other issues of value. In this case, it would be money. Whether that's Bitcoin or gold or what, as long as it's not Federal Reserve notes that your value that you tokenize in that dollar can be stolen from. When you tokenize the value of your labor in Bitcoin, for example, there's no central banker that can go and print more Bitcoin and steal the value. That value is locked into that Bitcoin. So if a Bitcoin buys you 10 chocolate bars today, it's going to buy you about 10 chocolate bars 1,000 years from now. Inflation becomes almost non-existent with solid money. So for Donald Trump to want to get rid of the Federal Reserve, that's a damn good thing for America and the world.
Is there any wrestler that you wanted to wrestle that you never had the opportunity to get in the ring with?
A wrestler that I've always wanted to wrestle and never had the opportunity to get into the ring with? Yes. Probably would have to say Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Definitely. I would love to have worked Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. It's one of those guys that, like a Mr. Perfect, he was glass smooth. He did everything with perfection. He was a hard worker, and definitely one of the guys I would have absolutely loved to have climbed into that ring with and performed with.
What's the funniest rib you ever saw pulled in wrestling?
The funniest rib I ever saw pulled in pro wrestling? Man, that's a tough question. I can tell you one of the... It's hard for me to say what the funniest rib is, but I can tell you one that happened to me that I will give props for. It was a pretty good rib, and that was when Al Snow had put my cell phone number on Live Raw on USA Network. He was doing a pre-tape where he was trying to find Pepper. Big Boss Man at the time had stolen his little dog Pepper. And so every week, Al Snow is doing a vignette on Raw. You know, if you found Pepper or whatever, he'd cut a promo. And so one day I was walking during the daytime, this is long before Raw starts, I was walking down the back hallway towards the locker room, and I saw Al Snow way down at the end of the hall with the TV crew, and they were going to tape their vignettes. And as I was getting ready to make a right turn to walk into the locker room, I heard Al way down the hallway say to the producer, "No, that is Val's." And so I stopped and I looked down the hall and I said, "Hey Al, what's mine?" And he goes, "Oh, nothing, I'll tell you after." I said, "All right." And I walked into the locker room not thinking anything of it. Later on that evening, the show's on, I go out, I do my match, I come back into the locker room, and there's a monitor in our locker room. Now I'm completely covered in sweat. I'm standing there with my hands on my hips, just waiting to cool down to stop sweating so I can go into the shower, change, and, you know, get ready to move on to the next city. In the monitor, I'm watching Raw live. Kind of half paying attention to it, half not. And I noticed that my cell phone rings in my bag, so I reach down, I pick up my cell phone, and I answer it, and the other person on the other line says, "Is this the phone I called to when I find Pepper?" And I was like, "Who's Pepper? What are you talking about?" And I hung up the phone because they wouldn't answer my question, and I hung up. As soon as I hung up, it rang again. And the second time I answered, it was a lady on the phone that said, "Is this the number I call to find Pepper?" And I'm like, "What? How could they? What the heck? Pepper what?" And then I started listening, and the whole locker room was dead silent. And immediately I look and I can see on the monitor that Al Snow's just wrapping up his whole Pepper thing, and he had put my number live on the air, and I knew it right away. It all clicked in, and I was like, "Oh, no way." And I hung up the phone, and the second I hung up, it rang again, and I went, "Oh!" And I turn around, and Al beelines it out the door, running, laughing his ass off the whole way down the hall. And yeah, so my number was all over USA Network, and the second you hit hang up, it would ring again. And it did. I turned it off. 2 hours later, Test and A-Train and I are driving down the road to the next city, and A-Train asked me, "Hey, is your phone still ringing?" And I was like, "Hey, good question, let's find out." And I go and turn it on, and sure enough, as soon as it got reception, this is 2 hours later, as soon as it got reception, it's ringing. My voicemail box was already full. I think at that time it only held 50 emails or something like that. It was already full, and it just rang, and I had to get the number changed. The next morning, it was still ringing. It was insane. Really good rib.
How hard was it for you to get a job in the marijuana industry?
Getting a job in the marijuana industry was difficult. When the dispensaries here in Arizona first started up, it seemed like they were only hiring their friends and their family members, very tight, close-knit people. Understandable. It was a new industry that people were still kind of shaky about here in Arizona. And so it was very, very difficult to get in. So ultimately what we did is I opened up a cannabis vapor lounge, and I opened it up with a business partner. And my goal really was to, get to know some of the dispensary owners and eventually get into the dispensaries. And so I started to meet people. People were coming into our vapor lounge that worked at the dispensaries. I met a couple of the owners as well. And the next thing I know, I'm getting an interview at Health for Life dispensaries, and got hired on there. And but getting in, I mean, that was a year-long process of meeting people just by opening my own cannabis vapor lounge for patients. We didn't sell marijuana in the vapor lounge. They had to buy the marijuana at the dispensaries, but they could bring it into our lounge and consume it there. And so I built a rapport with some of the people that worked in the dispensaries and that were owners of dispensaries as well. And eventually got hired on by Health for Life.
And what's your opinion of how Canada is going about legalizing marijuana and the process that it's been like so far?
We got lots of plans to do we got tons of plans, actually. I shouldn't say just lots of plans. We got tons of plans for cannabis products up in Canada. We got MPX International up there as well. Do I think cannabis legalization in Canada is perfect? Hell no, not even close. I think just by looking at the facts, Canada has carved out a narrow path that people can consume and grow, small amounts of cannabis. But still, if you step 1 foot off that path, it seems like the repercussions are even worse than when cannabis was fully illegal up in Canada. So there's still a lot of work to do for cannabis legalization in Canada. I think it's a step in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do up there.
Did you ever go back to wrestling in Mexico after your career was over with WWE?
I was originally supposed to go back to Mexico full-time and just do TNA part-time. There were some things that happened at that point in time with TNA and with Mexico where my Mexican work visa basically got torn up, and needless to say, I never got back down there. I started pursuing the cannabis industry after that whole fiasco. But yeah, there was a point in time when I was going to work Mexico again full-time, at least for a year, and then do TNA part-time. But yeah, I started moving into the cannabis industry shortly after that. So,
how have your workouts changed now compared to when you were in WWE?
When I was wrestling in WWE, I was lifting very heavy all the time and doing cardio and eating super clean. After professional wrestling, after shoulder surgery, I kind of got away from that a little bit. You know, I had other goals and other things I wanted to pursue. But I did, you know, I put on weight. I got all the way up to 275 pounds at one point, and started lifting again. And problem was while I was lifting, you know, I was building my muscle back up and I was losing fat, but I was just getting right back to where I was when I was wrestling. And at the time, I had a goal of running a marathon before I hit age 50. Well, I turned 49 in March, so last November I made the decision, hey, I need to run a marathon. I need to, you know, mark that or check that box off on my to-do list. So last November I decided I got to get down to 210 pounds and run one marathon and then go back up. So I've been, went from 275, I got all the way down to 230, and then I started getting really dizzy because I, you know, hit that pretty quick within a few months. And then backed off a little bit, stabilized at about 235, and then continued my way down, got down to about 218, 217, started getting dizzy again, and so now I'm stabilizing around 223, 224, and my goal is to get to 210 before midsummer, and then once I hit 210, I'm going to run that one marathon, just one, and that's it, and then I'll go back up to 250, 245.
How are your knees holding up and everything after the long career in the ring?
I've been pretty lucky with my knees. I do have a torn ligament in my left knee now, but overall my knees have been, you know, pretty solid. No real substantial issues other than that one torn ligament. It is a big reason as to why, being 49 years old and getting ready to run a one marathon, it is a big reason why I want to come down to 210. Running at, you know, 260, 270, you know, doing a marathon running on my knees at 260, 270 is not a smart idea at all. So that, hence the reason I'm trying to get down to 210.
And there was a fan asking on here if you had any funny stories about Andrew Test Martin.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stories about Andrew Test Martin. So Test was one of those guys that could never break cool mode. He always had to be Mr. Cool. And so there was one time A-Train and I were at a club in Toronto called The Government, and we were on the dance floor and we had these glow sticks and we were just dancing with these glow sticks, just going to town. And we're looking up on this balcony and there's Tess sitting on the balcony with his hands on the rail with his glasses on, just kind of looking down like with a smug, cool look on his face and not dancing. And we got to get his ass down here to dance. And so A-Train and I went up there and we trying to convince him to dance, and he just refused to do it. To him, dancing ain't cool. And so he was, no, I'm not doing that. You guys go down there and do it. You guys go down there and do it. Well, you know, we were all messed up anyway. So we go down to the dance floor and we start doing all these trippy things with these glow sticks. And the next thing I know, I have A-Train tapping me on the shoulder saying, Val, look at Test. Well, Test had made his way down from the stairs, and he was standing right with his back against the speakers and his hands with glow sticks, and he's sitting there with his eyes closed going with the glow sticks. It was the most, I mean, they got a 6'6" jacked up guy with glow sticks in his hand doing the most insane dance you could ever imagine. It was pretty funny. That was some funny stuff right there.
What were your top 3 cities to wrestle in?
Top 3 cities to wrestle in, definitely New York, Philadelphia, and probably Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Toronto, Ontario, Canada was always a lot of fun.
Were you cheered usually in Toronto even when you were a heel, because a lot of people know you're from that area?
I was, yeah, I got a lot of cheers in Toronto. Yeah, it was one of those things where, man, you walk out in Toronto and you get a completely different reaction than you would anywhere else, and you knew you were home at that point.
Is there any wrestler you grew up idolizing?
Wrestlers I grew up idolizing, definitely Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, Kenta Kobashi, Stan Hansen, Mr. Perfect. Yeah, those were some of the guys that I really looked up to.
This is a fan question. Do you have a favorite porn star?
Do I have a favorite porn star? I'd have to say Jenna Jameson, just because I worked with her, and it was never really got into porn. She's really the only porn star. I shouldn't say that. I do know another porn star too. What's her name again? She was in the wrestling business, she used to date Blue Meanie. What's her name again? Ah, dang. There's Jenna Jameson, and then the one that was dating Blue Meanie. Do you guys remember her name?
No, well, maybe one of the fans does, but I'm surprised that Blue Meanie actually dated a porn star.
He dated a porn star, and she was famous.
St. James, maybe?
Oh, yes.
Fans saying it on here, but
yeah, no, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. She was the porn star that went through a whole bunch of different guys in one porn shoot.
Oh, Jasmine St. James.
Jasmine St. Clair. Jasmine St. Clair. Yes, Jasmine St. Clair. That was it. Yeah.
And Blue Meanie went out with her. Wow.
Blue Meanie went out with her. Yeah.
I don't know. I look at him a little bit differently now. And this is a good question from a fan here. What are your thoughts on the comparison of you with Rick Rude?
The comparisons of Rick Rude and myself. I think the Val Venis character was Rick Rude 2.0. It was basically the ladies' man type character, just taken to a whole new level, and that was the Attitude Era compared to the 1980s era.
And where can fans follow you on social media if they want to look you up?
Ooh, I don't know if fans want to follow me on social media, because one of two things will happen. They're either going to love me or they're going to hate me, and so they can follow me on my Top Shelf Anarchy channel. Just go to YouTube/Top Shelf Anarchy. That's my activist channel. And then, of course, my Captain's Show channel on YouTube. It's The Captain's Show. And Captain's is spelled with a K. And that's more of my cannabis-related channel. It's also going to be, we're going to have a lot of different series coming up on that channel. We're going to get into cryptocurrencies on that channel. We're going to have some professional wrestling shows on that channel as well. So that's going to be more of the fun channel, the investment channel, and the cannabis channel. So the Captain Show on YouTube is the fun channel. Top Shelf Anarchy on YouTube is the activist channel.
And what are your thoughts on the current wrestling scene?
I'm not too into the current wrestling scene right now. I know there's a lot of organizations that are running full-time right now, or regularly, enough to where people can get a lot of work. To me, the wrestling industry itself doesn't really change a whole lot in terms of how business is done, but it does change significantly in how much of that business is being conducted across the country at any point in time. And it seems like the last couple of years, it seems like the independent scene has really blown up huge. And there's a lot more companies that are performing on a regular basis now than there was even, 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Any thoughts on superstar Billy Graham, who we're interviewing tomorrow?
Superstar Billy Graham, there's a character for you. I haven't heard from Superstar in a long, long time. I heard he was kind of in the wrestling news a little bit there after Kofi Kingston won the championship. Not exactly sure what he said, but I know some people were upset about what he said.
He's just trying to get heel again.
He's trying to get heel heat.
That's pretty much it.
Well, you know, that's hey, all the more power to him. I mean, that's a typical wrestling protocol right there, right? I mean, the idea is to get heat one way or another. So if he's getting some heat, that may be a good thing. If they do take the strap off him and he ends up, you know, sliding down the ranks a little bit, maybe to mid card or upper mid card, it'll be for one reason. And it'll be because he's just not putting the asses in the seats that the company requires to be put in those seats. And, you know, it's one of those things where I see a lot of guys saying, oh, they put the title on me, they took it off me, they didn't let it, they didn't use me right, or they didn't, you know, I hear a lot of that BS. But ultimately, if they put the title on you and they're trying different things and it's just not working, and what's telling if it works? Asses in the seats, tickets sold, merchandise sold. If it's selling, that title is going to be around your waist if you're putting asses in those seats. And so it is what it is. I mean, that's really the only reason they would take the title off of an individual, is if it just was not financially working out for the company. It's a business, and I want the guy that's putting the most asses in the seats to have that title, because that's the guy that's really pumping up most of the paychecks.
And if they had the title, not the same one that Kofi has, but Brock Lesnar was the champion for a long time. He's probably the most mainstream wrestler they have now. What are your thoughts on Lesnar?
My thoughts on Lesnar is the guy is truly a beast. He gets out, he does whatever he wants. He came into the wrestling business and put all his time and effort into really learning the skill. He was a risk taker. I mean, this guy was, when I first met him, he was over 300 pounds and he was doing the shooting star press. Impressive as impressive can be. Completely insane for him to even be trying to do a shooting star press. Not something I would have ever recommended he do. He doesn't need to. It's risky, and it's not going to put one extra penny in his bank account. And so I'm glad that he's really toned down his wrestling, his performance in terms of risk taking. I think he's, you know, developed a character that's imposing. He's vicious. He's powerful. And as long as he continues to cater to those characteristics, I think Brock Lesnar is always going to be a mainstay in professional wrestling. But the second you see, you know, a 300-pound guy going to do shooting star presses and moonsaults and things of that nature, it's good for a pop, not good for the career.
And you brought up Chris Benoit's name a few times during this. What are your thoughts on everything that happened with him?
My thoughts on Chris Benoit and everything that happened with him, man, I love that guy. I loved Chris Benoit, man. He was one of the most genuine guys in the locker room, not just in the WWE locker room, but in the professional wrestling world. One of the most genuine guys that you'd ever meet. And never in a million years did I think he would do what, you know, he did to his son and to his wife. He built an incredible career, a stellar career, one that's an inspiration to. It was an inspiration to me. It is an inspiration to a lot of young wrestlers coming up. He was hands down one of the best performers in the entire planet, and I think he'll go down in history as, you know, one of the best performers to ever live. That career is obviously sullied and by what happened that fateful day. It's one of those things where, on one hand, I look at Chris, I look up to him, I honored him. His skills were unmatched in professional wrestling. He was passionate about the business like no other. He was always a super good guy to hang around. He'd always give you the shirt off his back if he needed to. And then to try to discuss what happened with Chris in the waning days there, how can you take a guy that you held up on a pedestal and then in the same breath call him a coward for what he did? You know, whether I honestly, and obviously I have no facts backing this up, I don't believe he intentionally meant to snuff out the life of his wife. This is just my guess. I think his wife, probably, you know, under Xanax and alcohol, flipped out, became uncontrollable. I think he put his arm around her neck, probably to try and calm her down. He's all Xanaxed out and alcoholed up as well. And he ended up choking her out, crushed her windpipe, and she ended up dying. I think he then became unhinged when he realized what he just did. I don't think he intentionally tried to kill her. I think, and remember, these are just best guesses. No one really knows what happened. I think he then became unhinged, trying to decide what he's going to do. Doesn't want his son to grow up, knowing that his dad just murdered his child's mother. And I think he, in his own mind, I think he rationalized or attempted to rationalize just taking all three out right then and there. And to me, that's the coward way out. It is what it is. And what can you say? Tremendous performer, one of the most lovable guys in the locker room, one of the guys that, when it comes to wrestling, I think most wrestlers completely 110% respect what he did in the ring, what he did for the industry, what he did in his own career. But when it comes down to his private life, outside of the ring, out from underneath the bright lights of WWE, I think the Xanax and the alcohol got to him. And I think it got to his wife, and I think bad things happened because of pharmaceuticals and alcohol. And I don't think if that day was absent alcohol and Xanax, I think there's a good chance his wife and his child would still be alive today.
And do you see yourself eventually going into the WWE Hall of Fame? You had a long career there. You definitely made your mark.
It'd be an honor to be in the WWE Hall of Fame for sure. I would love to be in the WWE Hall of Fame. They are going to have to stop finding guys for pot, however, because I'd like to be that guy that when I get inducted, or if I ever get inducted into the Hall of Fame, once I'm done doing my little speech, I'm going to crack out the Captain's Canagar. That's right, the Captain's Canagar, a 7-gram cigar that's completely made of cannabis. I'm going to cut that end off of it, torch it, and I'm going to sit on stage and blaze that Canagar while I'm wrapping up my induction speech. And then after I take a few puffs of it, I'm going to start handing it out so it can get puff passed around the entire arena. You think 7 grams will cover the entire arena? What do you think?
Probably not.
Well, we might have to roll up a few more in the back, and as they burn out, hand out a few more.
And last question, just because I'm doing some UFO interviews this week. We are in Phoenix, and there's a lot of sightings here. It could have to do with military testing, but what's your opinion on all these videos out there of unidentified flying objects? Obviously, some of them are fake, but some of them can't be explained.
When it comes to UFOs and things like that, I'm a facts guy. I got to see the facts. Are there real UFOs? I don't know. I do know there's a town called Sedona, just north of here in Arizona, that there's a lot of weirdos that go up there and they look for UFOs. In fact, there's a diner there that's completely done up with a space theme and aliens and spaceships and moons and stars. It's pretty neat inside there. And they got this vortex thing that they have up in Sedona, and they got some pretty crazy people up there, but it's beautiful. And a lot of these sightings, I think, probably are military stuff that comes from Luke Air Force Base, maybe, which is out in the west end of Phoenix, but they do a lot of stuff, I guess, all over Arizona. And it's interesting. UFO sightings are definitely interesting. I think a lot of them are fake, but like I said, I'm a facts guy. I'm not going to say something is definitively fake unless I see facts backing that up.
And if someone sees this and wants to book you for an autograph appearance or anything, I guess Eric Sims is representing you right now. They could contact him, or is there any way? I guess you've said your social media if people want to contact you too. Yeah,
people can, if you're up in the Northeast and you want to book me, you can contact Eric Sims up there. He's really the guy that I use for a lot of my appearances up in the Northeast. If you want to do something somewhere else, you can contact me on any of my social media. On Twitter, it's at Val Venis, ENT. And then, of course, Facebook is facebook.com/the-Val-Venis. And on YouTube, of course, you have The Captain's Show, and it's Captain with a K. The Captain's Show.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your very detailed answers going through your career today. Is there any final message you want to say to close this off?
Final message I would like to say to all the wrestling fans out there and to all you pro wrestlers that are coming up through the ranks and looking to make it big in WWE or AEW or Impact Wrestling or All Japan or New Japan or CMLL or wherever it is you'd like to wrestle. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. Try your very best to save as much money as you can, and whatever it is you save, get it out of the US dollar and tokenize that value into some rock solid blockchain supporting cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Vergecoin, Digibyte, some rock solid cryptocurrency that has a maximum cap on its supply. Tokenize the value of your savings in cryptocurrency. Don't leave it in US dollars, because inflation is going to kill you. And by the time you're done, 20 or 30 years of taking bumps in that ring and you can't do it anymore, and the value of all that money that you saved has been siphoned off by central bankers, you're going to wish that you had tokenized all the value that you saved in cryptocurrencies. You're going to wish you had done that. So that would be my biggest piece of advice to pro wrestlers coming up and to wrestling fans that have other jobs. Anything you're saving, get it in to rock solid cryptocurrencies.